So, of course, I want to start by saying thank you, everyone, for joining. My name is Cody Armstrong, and today's topic is using analytics in Onshape Enterprise. So, this is really intended for those that either are using Onshape Enterprise today or are maybe considering using Onshape Enterprise in the future. And what I want to focus on are the analytics tools, the real time analytics, and the ways that you can interpret the data and all the different data that we have available to you. So, as I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions section in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question that you'd like, and I'll do my best to stop and answer the questions as we go through today's webinar. But again, the focus is going to be solely on the analytics tools available in Onshape Enterprise. It's going to be a short webinar. I'm just going to go through a lot of my personal favorite reports and the kinds of questions that they answer. And I think that's really what this is about. So the agenda today is pretty straightforward. I just want to discuss analytics on a high level. What is it, who has access to it, how do you set the permissions to it, where do you find it, those types of things. And then I want to get into the insights that it provides. And I think that's the benefit of using analytics in Onshape Enterprise, is the fact that you have tremendous insight into what's going on within your organization. All kinds of different examples that I can give you of ways that it provides information about the current status of projects or documents or user activity, all kinds of different things. Now, as always with these webinars, again, we really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. There's a question section there in the GoToWebinar control panel. I will do my best to stop and answer all the questions before we wrap things up today. But that's a brief agenda. We're going to keep things simple. It's going to be a short webinar, really just going to focus on the analytics aspects of Onshape Enterprise. So the first natural question is, what is Onshape Enterprise Analytics? And it's important to stress it's a real-time analytics tool for Onshape Enterprise customers. And I say real-time, and I stress real-time because that's something that's very unique to Onshape. In many reporting systems, when you think of more higher-end PDM systems or even PLM systems, they're really dependent on the file being checked in or the file being checked out. Those seem to be the events that get tracked in that kind of reporting history. What Onshape gives you is real-time look at that exact moment in time. So at any moment, I can run a report and see, what are the number of features created in this document today, or what are the number of exports, generated out of this document today, and I can see that right now, up to the moment. And that's something that, again, in traditional file-based systems, you had to wait for something to be checked in or checked out, so you couldn't. That was the moment in history that was tracked. So real-time analytics, meaning in any moment you can query and figure out exact information about the status of whatever it is that you're looking for. And the other element of that is, of course, project tracking, just seeing how projects are progressing. What's the status of the projects, even down to levels like what are the number of features created in that project in a certain given time, even the last few hours, right? So project tracking is another element of this. And lastly, of course, a complete audit trail. So analytics give you a complete audit trail of every event taking place within your enterprise. So there are a few things that I want to point out about these tools. One of the first things I want to say is it's easy to look at these and say, this is only an admin level function, or this is only for a specific group of users within the company. And that may be the case in your company. But I will say there's a lot of benefit to allowing engineers to do their own project tracking, or to look at these bits of information that are useful to them. So I would say, consider expanding, if you're using Onshape Enterprise and Analytics today, the number of people that can see the analytics, because it really has a lot of benefits in places you might not originally expect. I think a lot of users see this and say, well, this is my admin function, right? This is my admin way to oversee my organization. But there's a lot of benefit to involving more users than that. The managers, engineers within the organization, even other groups like post-sales or customer support. There's a lot of benefit to having access to this data. So that is a simple explanation into analytics. It's real-time tracking into your enterprise's info, right? Whether that be events, whether that be docs, whether that be information about logins or exports or imports. There's all kinds of information that can be can be pulled. So the next natural question is, who has access to this? And this is leading back to what I was talking about a moment ago. By default, typically this is an admin function, and that's the admin in the organization is by default the person that has access to the analytics, but they also control who else has access to the analytics. And so I'll say that as a global permission, as an admin of a company, a global permission, one of them is access analytics. And this is where you can add other teams or individuals to the ability to see the analytics. So it's important to stress, if you're part of an enterprise today and you're not seeing the analytics, chances are this is the reason why. It's an explicit permission that has to be given to you. But you can see in this screenshot, it's a bit small, but engineers, managers, support. So it is more than just the admins in this case that have access to the analytics tools. But again, important to stress, by default, it's generally an admin level function, but you can add other groups within your company, other teams, and this is how you do it. And it's from, again, the company settings. It is a global permission. All right, so that's how you control who has access to analytics. So once you've gifted access to the appropriate teams, how do you access analytics for Onshape Enterprise? And the short answer is, you will see at the very top when you sign into Enterprise, on the far right, analytics. Right, so in the top, when you sign into an enterprise, you have activity, you have documents, and you have analytics. Analytics is what we're talking about here today. That will not be available if you do not have that permission that we discussed a moment ago. So again, after signing into your enterprise, at the very top, you'll see analytics. Right, that's how you access all the analytics that we're going to discuss here. So let's dig in. Again, really want to stress, please ask any questions that you'd like. There's a questions section in the GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to ask any question that you'd like, and I'll stop and answer them as we go through things. What I'd like to do is go through a few of my personal favorite reports, because I think they answer a lot of questions that a lot of users or managers of an organization have. And so I'd like to go through a few of those and then highlight in general kind of how we use analytics in Onshape Enterprise. I want to start with the easiest starting point, and that is the activity overview. So the activity overview is a report. It's a high-level report of general activity within your enterprise. And it's high-level, meaning it shows you the number of active users, the number of projects that were created, and the number of versions or releases that have been created across your entire enterprise, right? So it's a great kind of way to start, your reports, of just understanding what's the latest activity. And that latest activity, by default, will be the past 15 days, but we can get into how you can change that and customize these reports. But activity overview, definitely a good place to start if you're new to Onshape Analytics. So what I'm going to do is jump back and forth, forgive me, between my slides and the actual reports themselves. But let's jump into it. Now, as I mentioned before, when you sign into your enterprise, you'll see at the very top here we have activity, documents, and finally analytics. Analytics is what we're discussing here today. And when you select that, you'll see a few things. First off, a list of every single report that you can generate, and then filters for different report types. So you can filter by different categories of reports, but in this case, we're going to start with just, again, a simple activity overview. So I'll click Activity Overview, and it will bring up the report that we were just discussing a moment ago. It is a high-level overview of the activity going on in your enterprise. So again, you'll see number 6 created documents, 15 versions created, 5 releases have taken place. And if you look closely, the filter at the top is set to date in the past 15 days. So this is a high-level overview of the activity going on in my enterprise over the last 15 days. Now, you'll see kind of a high-level stats for general things: imports, exports, drawings created, documents created, active users, so on. But then you have all these other bits of information that you can pull from as well. What projects are most active in terms of modeling time? I can see the chassis project has 40 hours in the last 15 days logged in it. So that is by far our most active project in the enterprise. I could even break them down into individual time, viewing that over time, right? So I can see that on this day we spent a considerable amount of time on the hydraulic steering pump, but on this day we spent a considerable amount of time on the chassis, right? So over time I can see what projects have been worked on, most active documents within those, right? Where are the most active documents? And then anything in terms of release status. Do you have any pending documents? Anything that's pending release? Then, of course, we have login locations. So where are your projects being accessed, in the world? And then, of course, we have user time. So within your active users, who's doing the most and on what days, right? So that is a high-level activity overview, and it's definitely one of the first reports that you would run in your analytics just to get a sense of what's going on over the last 15 days. Now, I mentioned before that you can customize these reports. I can change them in the sense of what's being queried over what periods of time, or all kinds of different categories. So to do that, it's very subtle, but if you click filters, it will expand out the filters available for that report, in this case, the activity overview. And you can see I can set the date to a different time period, right? I can even set different criteria. So I can say, show me the activity overview on an individual day within, over the last week, or show me, just in the past 7 days, or show me the activity overview between this day and that day, right? So you can customize these filters and generate your own reports based on that. By default, again, you'll see the last 15 days. You can make them an OR statement. So if I click the plus symbol, I can have an OR statement combining multiples, right? The other thing to keep in mind is you can also see per project the activity, right? So for instance, in the past 15 days, project is equal to hydraulic steering pump. I can set that, and now I would see the activity overview of just the hydraulic steering pump, right? Keep in mind, if you customize the filters, you must click Run to regenerate the report, right? So important caveat, by default, it would generate with default criteria, but if you go and change it, you would want to click Run to regenerate. Good question. How is project user time determined? For example, how does Onshape system account for the user away from their desk but may have an Onshape session open? As far as my knowledge today, and admittedly, I'm about 80% certain of this, but not 100%. As I understand it today, it's based on when their session times out. And if you walk away from your desk, it will time out, I believe it's around 30 minutes or so after no activity. So that's when it would stop counting, so to speak, the project time and so on. But it's based on our time. So there is a small amount of potential time between inactivity and the session canceling, which would be captured in our user time. Again, not 100% certain on that, but I'm fairly confident that's the way it works as of today. All right, so again, you can drill down. Now I'm looking at the activity for just an individual project. In this case, the hydraulic steering pump, right? I could see where it's been most active, what are the most active documents in this project, where in the world this project is being worked on, and what time frame, when across the week it's being worked on. So again, the filter is a very important part of this, something that allows you to query for different bits of information at different times, by different users, by different projects, all kinds of ways to kind of dissect the info. All right, so let's jump back to analytics. Again, that's the activity overview. That's probably where I would start if I was looking for a high-level kind of overview of where we've been, over the last X amount of days. So that's one of the first places to start, but what you'll inevitably end up in is, in multiple places, the audit trail. And the audit trail is, like the name implies, a complete list of events. So it's literally every single event, and you can filter at the highest level. So I can say, show me every single event that's happened in my enterprise over the last 5 days. And it will list every single little event to every document by any person in the entirety of your enterprise. So it can be very high level. It can be also very granular. So I can say, show me all of the export events that have happened over the last 7 days. And it will show me each time that something has been exported out of my enterprise. Or I could say, show me all of the share events, right? And it would list all of the share events that have happened over a given period of time. Or I could filter it even further and say, show me within this document how many export events have taken place, or within this document by this user, how many export events. So it's up to you how broad or refined you want to make that search, but it's a very powerful tool for understanding what's happening in your enterprise. One of the most important aspects of enterprise is what we call the guest in enterprise, and that just means that it's an outside, maybe contractor, someone that you work with that needs edit access to your model, but only that project. And so one of the questions we get quite often is it possible to see if a guest has exported? Or if is it possible to see if a guest has done this? Or is it possible to see if the guest has even opened the document? And the answer is yes to all of those things via this audit trail. So again, think of it as a list of events. You can make it as broad as you'd like or as refined as you'd like. It's the second one in the list of analytics. One thing I would point out about the audit trail and the activity overview and just about all of the reports that you'll see is that they have the ability to drill down into different levels. So from the activity overview, for instance, I could click the number of exports and it would run a report of all of the exports over a given period of time. So there's links from one report to another in a lot of different places within analytics, something important to stress. All right, so as I mentioned before, by default, at the broadest level, it's essentially just a list of all events. So I am now looking at every single event that's happened to this enterprise going back 7 days, right? So I can see all activity, no matter what it is. But I can drill down into this. So if I wanted to, I can filter by different things. I could say, show me all activity by an individual user. Show me all activity or all events associated with a project or an individual feature, right? I can say, a number of mates or something along those lines. I can also define by events. And events are really useful for a number of different things. Say, for instance, I want to know how many times it's been shared, how many times something has been exported or imported. I want to know, all kinds of different bits of information about the activity associated with maybe a project. I can drill down into that. So you'll see if I click in event, it brings up a list of all the possible events that I can audit by. So I could say add assembly feature, add assembly instance, right? How many times over the last 7 days has someone added an assembly instance to an assembly? There's lots of them that I could go through. I'm not going to go through them now. Add configuration parameter is another one. Animations. How many times have animations been run over the past 7 days? Cancel operations. I'm going to get down here to delete element. How many times has someone deleted an element from a project in the past 7 days? So lots of them. Export is probably the most common question we get asked. What if I want to see every single export that's happened over the past 7 days? So in this case, I would just say event is equal to export document. Again, click run. It's going to run through the report and list every single export event that's happened in your enterprise. So this isn't filtered by any document or project. This is at the highest level, throughout the entire enterprise. Questions. Is FeatureScript available for analytics to create custom reports, for example? No. So I think this ties into the next question. Is there an API to access or generate this data? To be honest, I'm not 100% certain if we have an API to pull this. What I'd recommend is sending an email to API support at onshape.com, and they can definitely answer that question. I'm not 100% certain, just only because this has only been available now for about 3 months or so relatively new for us, but definitely worth asking. All right, so that is the audit trail, and you can see in the past 7 days I've had 3 export events, all from the tire assembly document by Neil Cook, right? So definitely one of the most powerful analytics tools that we have available is this audit trail. Now, I mentioned before, export document is a good example, but it could also be import or delete, or any kind of major event that you think is worth running a report on, you can. Right. All right, so that is the audit trail. Now, one other point that I want to make, one other thing that I would like to stress, and I've already mentioned it, but I just want to briefly mention it again, is you can drill down into other reports from, for instance, the activity overview. So if I go to the activity overview, you see there are 3 exports listed over the last 15 days. But if I click on that, this is actually a link to the audit trail. So you can see here, audit trail. And what that will do is take me to the same audit trail we were at just a moment ago and set the event to export document. So it's just a quick way to run that export audit trail report, right? And see, from the activity overview, just a hyperlink to this report. And there are a lot of cases of that throughout analytics. So the thing I would point out is, just in general, keep an eye out for the small ellipsis menus or the hyperlinks that will take you from one to another very quickly. Oftentimes, you may not even have to filter on your own if you have a hyperlink from the activity overview or some of the other reports that will take you right there, right? So again, this is just drilling down into one report from another, right? So that's Audit Trail. Again, a very important one. It can list all events, or you can really narrow down that search into specific events depending on what you're looking for, right? All right, so now let's get into the next one. This is another question that comes up often, is how can I see a list of everyone that's shared into a specific document and the permissions that they have in that document, right? And that is document permissions. It's essentially a report of all the permissions associated with whatever document you specify, or at the highest level, all documents, if you leave that field open. Again, very straightforward. From the analytics page, you'll see document permissions. And again, it's essentially just a report showing you permissions over documents by individuals and what those permissions are, most importantly. So you can see if guests have view access or edit access. You can see which individuals have edit access or view access within the document. But it's another commonly asked question. Again, generally the question is, how do I see who has access to which documents, right? And that's where the document permissions report makes the most sense. At the highest level, it's across the board, right? So it's looking across all documents and showing you, here's all documents and the permissions associated with them. And I can see individual and the permissions right next to them, right? Now, I can drill down into individual documents. So if I go document name is equal to, the hydraulic steering pump, for instance, that we were looking at a moment ago, I can see, okay, who has permission to the hydraulic steering pump and what are those permissions, right? So again, it's just another way of analyzing the data, but it's a commonly asked question. How do I see who has access to which document? So you can see here, I've now filtered by hydraulic steering pump, and I can see who has access to just the hydraulic steering pump, and more importantly, what those permissions are. Here you can see edit, if you have view only access, so it just depends on what your role is. So that is the document permissions. Another very commonly asked question, one that I wanted to make sure to address. Now let's get into the next one, and that is release activity. And this one's particularly useful if you're using release management, of course, and you're interested in seeing at a high level what are the releases that have been accepted, what are the releases that are pending, and what releases have been obsoleted, right? Made obsolete by newer releases. So it's essentially a high-level overview of all of your release activity. And this is something that if you're just using release management without Enterprise, you really can't see as an engineer or an admin. What are all of the projects waiting to be released or pending state. All right, so let's get into it. As I mentioned before, let's go back to our analytics here. We want to get into release activity. And as I mentioned before, it's just think of it as an overview of release activity. So specific to, how many releases have you had in the past 30 days, right? How many have been approved? How many have been rejected? How many are made obsolete? Who are the top contributors, meaning who are the individuals releasing the most, right? And where are your releases, right? You can see I have 12 releases that have been released, but 2 that are pending. And probably the biggest question that this answers is, what are my pending releases? Here I can see I have 2 pending releases, belt-driven pump mod and modified as per ECO 4456. These are releases that are waiting for someone's action, right? Now, one neat thing that you could do, as I mentioned, a lot of places you can drill down into the actual details. So, for instance, I'm here looking at this release. I can see that it's pending. Well, let's take a look at the release itself. You can see it says open in Onshape. That will actually open up the release candidate. And I can move forward, release, accept, whatever it is that I need to do. But the important thing to stress there is, again, it's a direct link from here to the release candidate. If I was the manager looking at my pending releases, I could easily jump into it, take a look at it right from here. I don't have to go back and search by the document name or anything along those lines. It's essentially a link. Now, you can also drill down into the release audit, and that means who approved it, who submitted it, who approved it, when did those things take place, what was involved in the release. And this is a really useful tool for going back and looking at a release and kind of the metadata associated with it. Now, you can drill into a release audit directly from here, or you can go back to your analytics page and go to just below release activity, release audit. And as the name implies, it allows you to go into releases and explore them on a little bit greater detail. So if I go into the release audit, it shows me all the releases in the past 30 days. I can filter, right? So if I want to see release associated with an individual part number, I can do that. Releases that are or anything in the release audit that's in the pending state. That's another one that you might want to do. But once you've found what you want, you can drill into the release candidate dashboard. And this will break down the details of an individual release. So now we're no longer looking at all of the releases at the high level. Now we're looking at one release and what are the details of that release. So when was it approved? Where is it at currently? Has it been made obsolete? What objects are in that? I can drill down into it from here, right? I can hyperlink from it from here, and what was the details of it? Who submitted it? Who approved it? Right? What revisions were involved? What were the individual parts that were involved? What were the objects being released, essentially? But again, just to point out, in a lot of different situations, if I go into a release audit, it shows me all the releases, and then I can drill down into one of those via the release candidate dashboard and see who was involved in the release, when was it approved, where is it at currently, which objects were involved. So it really just depends on what you're looking for, of course. But if you're looking to not only see at the high level what are all the releases doing, but then drill down into an individual release and see the details of that, this is what you would do, the release candidate dashboard. And again, the easiest way to get to it is just to do a release audit and choose a release and then drill down into it from there. Right. Again, a lot of places in analytics have those hyperlinks or open-in options where you can go quickly from one report to another. Right. All right, so that is release activity, and I also went into release audit, right? Very useful for drilling down into individual release candidates. Release audit at a high level will show you all release candidates, of any time, and you could filter by releases that are pending, releases that are obsolete, or leave it open like we did. But I think most useful is you can go into an individual release, bring up the information for that release, and see who was involved with it, when was it approved, all those details. Now let's get into team list. Now I mentioned before there's a lot of different uses for analytics, whether it be as an admin wanting to see progress on a high level, or a user looking for document permissions, or a user that's looking for, who's involved with this team. Do I want to share with that team who's on that team? And team list is a great way to do that. It lists all teams in the enterprise, and it shows the members for those teams. Right? Very useful for a lot of different individuals within the organization, and a very easy report within analytics to run. So you'll see near the bottom here, team list. As I mentioned before, the first thing we'll do is show you all of the teams in your enterprise. But you can drill down a number of different ways. If you're interested in, for instance, who's on the engineering team, I can click here and you'll see team members, and this will take you to the team members dashboard. And so now I'm looking at the members of the engineering team, right? So it's a great way of understanding my organization, and useful in a number of different scenarios, even outside of the typical kind of IT admin oversight role, even as engineers, looking for who's in the procurement team or the QA team. This report will tell you that, right? All right, so those are the various reports that I wanted to highlight. By no means are they all of the reports. It's important to understand there's lots of detailed information that we could be getting into here. I just don't want to spend too much time going through each individual report. But I do want to stress again, very easy to use, and just keep an eye out for those links between, one from one port to another. They can be a very useful way of getting around within your analytics. All right, so what I'd like to do is kind of wrap things up here with two final questions that I get asked quite often with regards to analytics. One of the first questions that gets asked quite often is, can I export a report? And the short answer is yes. And you have two options today. You have PDF and CSV. And so what you'll see under nearly every report, nearly every individual stat within a report is this option to download data. And that's what you have. You have PDF or you have CSV options. So let's jump back into, for instance, the activity overview. I just want to show this option because it's kind of subtle. In the top right corner of any report, you have this little gear icon. If you click the gear icon, you have download as PDF or download as CSV. You can choose, in this case, just to open in browser. And what this will do is take that report that you've generated and save it as a PDF or save it as a CSV. But again, just keep in mind, probably one of the more common questions I get asked from enterprise users, is there a way to actually generate a file that I can use maybe in a PLM system or just to as a report to show management, for instance? And the answer is yes, you have those download options. Now, it's not just here. Within each individual stat, you also have that ellipsis menu. As I mentioned before, you'll find under that ellipsis menu options to get into other dashboards or options, as I mentioned before, to download, right? So if you want to download just project activity as a graph, you can do that. And there's a download data option for that. But this would allow you to drill down and generate reports, PDFs, or CSVs of individual stats within your activity overview or within your document permissions, whatever it may be. If you have multiple fields that you can visualize, you can generate multiple different reports and download them as whatever, or in this case, PDF or CSV, whichever format you'd like. So that is exporting. It's a commonly asked question. Again, keep an eye out for either the gear menu at the top of the report or the ellipsis menus, the drop downs where you can choose the options to download. Now, the next question that I get asked quite often is, well, what about Onshape Mobile? And the short answer is all of this works on Onshape Mobile as well. So if you already have the Onshape app installed, you don't have to do anything special. What you'll see when you sign into your enterprise, bear with me for just a moment here, is the same analytics that we were looking at in the browser just a moment ago. So I'm now running this on an iPad, right? And you'll see at the very bottom, I have, as a member of an enterprise, activity, right? So I can see the activity feed here. I can see documents, right? and I can see, of course, analytics. So that's how you access the analytics from your mobile device. But then I can run the same exact reports that we were looking at just a moment ago. So here's the activity overview, loaded on my iPad, and it is optimized for the experience. So in this case, I can see a lot of the same details I saw in the browser. Naturally, that's going to look formatted, just slightly differently when you access this from the phone, but it will optimize for the experience, right? But the big thing I would stress is you don't have to do anything special. Sign into your enterprise from Onshape Mobile, and you will have all the same analytics tools. And it's not just the same analytics tools. I can go into the same filters and rerun the reports, and so I have access to this from any device. And I think that's one of the more common questions we get, from users using analytics is, do I need to be in front of my computer to see this data? And the answer is no. As long as you have Onshape Mobile, you'll have access to the same analytics that we've shown you, throughout today's webinar. All right, so that is what I had planned. I'm going to wrap things up here today, but I do want to finish with just one comment, so bear with me. If you're new to Onshape, if you're still getting a feel for Onshape, and this is one of your first webinars, one of the things I'd recommend is checking out the Onshape Learning Center. It's not specific to enterprise. This was somewhat of a niche in the sense that not everyone that uses Onshape is using enterprise. But the Onshape Learning Center focuses on the core CAD aspects of Onshape. So if you're new to Onshape and you're interested in learning more about the basics, the basic part modeling, assembly modeling, data management aspects of Onshape, definitely check out the Onshape Learning Center. And you can find it at learn.onshape.com. You have a number of different options for training. Self-paced training, you can go at your own pace. Instructor-led options, so if you are interested in having an instructor walk you through using Onshape, that's an option as well. And then finally, technical briefings, so, various papers on topics, anywhere from document structure and best organization tips to all kinds of assembly tips and part modeling tips. So a very valuable resource for those interested in learning Onshape. And I always like to mention it for those out there that may be listening and are new and are looking for, where do I find info to get started? So learn.onshape.com. So I'm going to wrap things up. I want to say thank you, everyone, for joining. I am going to stick around and answer any questions that you have, so feel free to ask any questions in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. I'll do my best to stop and answer them. But that's it, everyone. Thank you, and have a good day.